The crack in the concrete floor ran from the base of the tool chest all the way to the drain in the middle of the garage, and Levi Martel had memorized every inch of it. He'd been staring at it long enough. 3 years running a one-man shop in a town that barely showed up on most maps. Heron Falls, Ontario, tucked between the Shield and the highway, the kind of place where people stopped for gas and kept driving. The garage had come to him the hard way. His father had died owing more than he owned, and the bank had taken everything except the building itself, which wasn't worth enough to bother with. Levi had been 22 then. He was 25 now, and most mornings he was under a vehicle before the coffee finished brewing. He wasn't unhappy. That was the thing people didn't understand. When they looked at the chipped walls, and the single flickering fluorescent tube and the hand-lettered sign out front, he had his work. He had the knowledge his father had given him before the heart attack took him. Not the shop, not the money, but the understanding of how metal behaved, how it told the truth when you knew how to listen. That was worth more than anything else the old man could have left behind. It was a Tuesday in late September when Archer Boudreau walked through the door. Levi heard the bikes first. Not one, maybe 4 or 5. The low rumble rolling down the main street like weather coming in. He was elbow deep in a '94 Silverado, and he didn't pull his head out right away. Bikes came through Heron Falls. It was a corridor route for clubs running between Thunder Bay and the south. He'd seen patches before. He'd done work for riders before. He didn't have a policy about it one way or another. The shadow fell across the floor before the man spoke. Archer Boudreau was not a large man in the way that made people reach for superlatives. He was wide through the shoulders and thick at the jaw, with forearms that suggested he'd done real physical work at some point and hadn't stopped. His vest was worn dark with road time. The patch on the back said Iron Corridor MC Thunder Bay Chapter, and beneath the chapter name, in smaller letters, Road Captain. "Someone told me you're the best mechanic between here and Sudbury," he said. Levi wiped his hands on a shop rag. "Whoever told you that probably just meant I was the closest." Archer didn't smile. Exactly. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Maybe. "You got time to look at something?" The bike he rolled in was a 1969 Harley-Davidson Shovelhead, and even before Levi crouched down beside it, he could feel that something was wrong. Not mechanically wrong. The engine sounded clean enough from what he'd heard outside, and the chrome had been kept up with care. Something structural, something in the way the frame sat. "How long have you been riding this one?" Levi asked. 31 years, Archer said. Levi nodded slowly. He ran his hand along the lower frame rail, not pressing, just following the line of it. "Who worked on this last?" "Shop in Kenora. 3 months ago." "What for?" "Said there was stress cracking near the neck. Said they welded it." Levi stood up and got his flashlight. He lay down on the creeper and rolled under the front of the bike, which Archer was holding steady without being asked. The light caught what he was looking for almost immediately, a neat, professional-looking bead of weld running along the neck joint, clean on the surface, smooth as anything you'd see in a catalog photo. Too smooth. He stayed under there a long time. Longer than Archer expected, probably, because after a while the road captain shifted his weight and said, "You find something?" "Give me a minute," Levi said. He found 2 more places, one on the right down tube, one at the junction behind the engine mount. Same thing each time, surface work that looked right, looked finished, looked like someone who knew what they were doing. And underneath, when he probed the edge with his pick tool, the grind marks of someone who had filed down the original metal before welding over it. Someone who had known there was cracking and had covered it instead of fixing it. He came out from under the bike and sat up on the creeper for a moment, just looking at the floor. The crack in the concrete ran from the tool chest to the drain. "What did the shop in Kenora charge you?" he asked. $1,100. Levi put the flashlight down on the workbench. He could feel Archer watching him. He could feel the weight of what he was about to say, the shape of it, the way it would land. This was not a stranger's car with a stranger's problem. This was a man's 31-year-old machine, the one he'd ridden to whatever he'd become, and someone had taken $1,100 from him for work that had made it more dangerous than before they touched it. "The welds are cosmetic," Levi said. "Whoever did them prepped the surface to look clean, but they didn't address the underlying fracture. The metal under the bead is compromised. At highway speed under load, especially on bad road surface, there's a real possibility the neck joint fails." He paused. "If that happens, you won't have steering. You'll have a second and a half, maybe less." The garage was quiet. Outside, someone's truck went past on the main road. Archer Boudreau looked at the bike for a long time. When he looked back at Levi, his expression hadn't changed much, but something behind his eyes had. "You're sure? I can show you." Levi picked up his pick tool. "I'll show you exactly what I found." He did. He walked Archer through every point, explaining what healthy weld integration looked like, explaining what concealment looked like, explaining the difference. Archer asked 2 questions, both of them precise and technical. He understood what he was being told. When it was over, Archer stood back and crossed his arms. "The shop in Kenora," he said. "You know them?" "Not personally." "What's their reputation?" Levi chose his words. "I've heard they do good work on newer bikes. I don't have personal experience." He stopped. Then, because it was the honest thing, I've also heard they've had complaints. Nothing documented. Nothing that went anywhere. Archer nodded. It was a slow nod, the kind that meant he was filing information, not reacting to it. What would you charge to fix it properly? For the neck joint alone, done right, you're looking at strip the old weld material, prep the base metal, re-examine the actual fracture depth, and re-weld with proper penetration and fill. 8 to 12 hours of work, depending on what I find when I get in there. Parts are minimal. It's mostly labor. He quoted a number that was fair. He knew it was fair because he'd been quoting fair prices for 3 years in a town that couldn't afford otherwise. Archer looked at him. Why didn't you just tell me it needed a tune-up and send me on my way? Levy picked up the shop rag again. Not because his hands needed wiping, but because it gave him something to do with them. Because then you'd be back on that bike. Archer Boudreau left the Shovelhead in the garage and rode out on a borrowed machine with one of the others who'd come with him, a quiet man named Remy, who waited outside the whole time without coming in, without asking. Before he left, Archer gave Levi a direct look and said, "I'll be back in 3 days. I'd like this done when I return." It wasn't a threat. It was stated the same way a person states a flight time, as a fact they expect the world to accommodate. Levi worked. The first thing he did was document everything. He photographed each weld site from multiple angles, wrote down his observations in the small notebook he kept on the workbench, and made a careful diagram of the frame, with each problem point marked. He didn't know why exactly, except that something in him said, there should be a record of this. Then he started cutting. When he got into the neck joint, really got in, past the cosmetic bead, he found worse than he'd expected. The original fracture had been running for some time, the kind of progressive stress crack that develops over years of hard riding on northern roads. The shop in Kenora would have seen it immediately. They would have known that addressing it properly meant full strip, full examination, the possibility of a more substantial repair than a surface weld could cover. They had chosen the surface weld anyway. It took him 10.5 hours across 2 days. He used fresh rod, took his time with the penetration, tested the heat input at every stage. He ground back and inspected twice before finishing. When he was done, the weld was not beautiful in the way show quality work was beautiful. It was honest, which was a different thing. It showed the work it had done. He also found, while he was in there, evidence of a second repair at the down tube. Older, probably from the late 90s, done by someone who'd known what they were doing. He left it alone. It had held for 30 years. It would hold for 30 more. On the third day, he called the number Archer had left. Archer arrived at 4 in the afternoon. This time, there were more bikes. Levi heard them coming from 3 streets away. Not 4 or 5, something more than that. He came out from under the Silverado he'd gone back to and stood in the doorway. There were 11 of them in the parking lot. 11 machines, 11 riders, all of them iron corridor patches. They parked in a loose formation and waited. Archer came in alone. Levi walked him through the repair the same way he'd walked him through the problem. He showed him the photographs. He showed him the before and after on the frame. He explained what he'd found when he got into the neck joint properly, how far the fracture had actually run. What would have happened at the wrong moment on the wrong road? Archer listened to all of it. Then he sat down on the stool next to the workbench, the one Levi's father had sat on, the one with the cracked vinyl seat that had never been replaced, and he was quiet for a while. The kid who worked on it in Kenora, Archer said finally. He was 20 years old, second-year apprentice. His uncle owns the shop. Levy didn't say anything. He told his uncle what he found. His uncle told him to run the surface bead and write it up as a full repair. Archer looked at the bike. We found this out this morning. One phone call to the right person. The garage was quiet again. I want to be clear about something, Archer said. He turned and looked at Levi directly, the way he'd looked at him the first day. You could have told me the same thing that shop told me. You could have run the bead yourself, charged me for the same work, sent me home. I wouldn't have known the difference. You would have, eventually, maybe. A pause, but not the way you'd have known. Levy set the invoice down on the workbench. It was what he'd quoted, not $1 more. Archer looked at the invoice. He took out his wallet and paid it in cash. Each bill laid flat on the workbench, and then he laid another 2 bills on top of the stack and held up a hand before Levi could speak. That's not a tip, Archer said. That's the difference between what you charged me and what the work was worth. Levy left the money on the bench. He picked up the shop rag. Outside, the 11 riders were still waiting. What happened next was not loud. That was the thing Levi would remember most afterward, the silence of it. Archer went back out to the parking lot. He said something to Remy, short and quiet, and Remy took out a phone. The call lasted less than a minute. Then Archer walked back to where his Shovelhead stood, ran his hand along the top of the tank the way a person does when they're checking that a thing is still real, and he mounted up. The 11 bikes started. They moved out of the parking lot in a loose group and turned north on the main road, and the sound of them faded slowly, the way northern silence fills in after something passes through it. Levi stood in the doorway of the garage for a while after they were gone. The afternoon light was coming in low and flat across the parking lot, catching the oil stains in the asphalt. His coffee had gone cold on the workbench. The crack in the floor ran from the tool chest to the drain, same as it always had. He went back to the Silverado. 2 weeks later, on a Thursday morning, Levi was opening the shop when he heard the sound coming down the main road from the north. He stopped with his hand on the door and listened. It was a long sound, the kind that doesn't resolve into distinct machines right away, but builds and builds until the air itself seems to thicken with it. The first bike appeared at the end of the street, then another, then a group of three, then more behind that, coming steadily, the pace unhurried, no one rushing. Levi stood in the doorway and watched them come. He counted and then stopped counting. Iron Corridor MC, all chapters. The patches were from Thunder Bay, from Sudbury, from Sault Ste. Marie, from the smaller chapters in between. They filled the main street of Heron Falls, end to end, rolling at walking pace, and the people who came out of the hardware store and the coffee shop and the post office across the way stood on the sidewalk and watched with the particular stillness of people witnessing something they don't entirely have a category for. They parked, all of them. The sound died at once, like something cut, and then there was only the ordinary sound of Heron Falls in the morning. The wind off the shield, a dog somewhere, the post office door closing. Archer came forward from the group. He walked to where Levi was standing and stopped a few feet away. "I want to introduce you to some people," he said. What followed was not a ceremony. There were no speeches. Men came forward and introduced themselves by name. Chapter presidents, road captains, a few older men who didn't give their titles but didn't need to. And they shook Levi's hand the way working people shake hands, with the full grip, looking at you directly. Some of them said nothing at all. Some of them said a few words. One man, broad and gray-haired with a Thunder Bay patch and an expression that suggested he had not smiled easily in some time, looked at Levi and said, "You could have taken the money and sent him home." "I know," Levi said. The man nodded. That was enough. They stayed for less than an hour. Some of them bought coffee from the shop across the road. A few came into the garage and looked around, not intrusively, just with the interest of people who understood what a one-man shop required to run. Remy spent 20 minutes talking to Levi about the crankcase on a 72 Sportster he was rebuilding, a real conversation between people who knew what they were talking about. And when he left, he shook Levi's hand again and said, "If you ever want steady work from us, you'll have it." Levy thanked him. He meant it. When they left all at once. Archer first, then the rest in a long rolling line that took nearly 3 minutes to clear the main street. People were still on the sidewalks. The woman who ran the post office was standing on her step with her arms crossed, watching the last of the bikes disappear north. And when she looked over and caught Levi's eye, she shook her head slowly, not in disapproval, but in the specific way that people shake their heads when they've seen something they didn't expect to see in their town. Levi went inside. The shop was the same as it had always been. The cracked floor, the fluorescent tube, the hand-lettered sign. The Shovelhead was gone, ridden out by the man who had ridden it for 31 years and would ride it for more years now. On the workbench next to his notebook and his pick tool, and the mug of coffee that had gone cold again, was the money Archer had paid him. He thought about his father, who had run a shop the same way, in a different town, without enough recognition and without enough money, and who had told him once, only once, the kind of thing a person says because they mean it, and not because they're making a speech, that the work itself knew when it was done right. He'd been 16 years old when his father said it. He hadn't understood it fully then. He understood it now. He picked up his shop rag and went back to work, and outside the main road was quiet, and the morning light lay flat across the parking lot, and the town of Heron Falls settled back into itself the way it always did after something passed through, slowly, without ceremony, becoming again the ordinary place it had always been, underneath everything that had just happened.